On this episode of China Unscripted, the Chinese Communist Party's increasingly authoritarian stranglehold over the economy has spooked foreign businesses and even has Chinese companies looking for an escape. Has China killed the goose that laid the golden egg? Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
And joining us today is Benjamin Qiu. He's an attorney at Elliott Kwok Levine Jaroslaw. That's a New York-based law firm that, among other things, advises corporations on how to handle the risks of investing in Hong Kong and mainland China. Well, Benjamin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously care a lot about Hong Kong. We've been there for the protest movement, so it's good to get back into this. So here's my question for you. Since you advise people on investing in Hong Kong and mainland China, why not be in Hong Kong? You're originally from mainland China.
Well, Hong Kong has always been such an important part of modern China culture and business. When I was a kid growing up in Beijing, Hong Kong was by far the trendsetter for the greater China business or cultural circles. The music, the movies, the TV shows, and relating to the TV shows, a lot of the court dramas. It was one of the major, early inspiration for me to become a lawyer or eventually, business person. And of course, part of what happened in Hong Kong is nobody's fault. Hong Kong's economy was maybe 25, 30% of the Greater China GDP back in the early 90s. And now, of course, it's naturally down to something like 2%. It's a fraction of the GDP of a Guangdong province, probably.
But that's not because Hong Kong declined. It's more because other cities like Beijing, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai.
Right. Part of that is nobody's fault. Not because Hong Kong declined, not because Hong Kong lost its civil society or modern rule of law, but more to do with China getting rich the past 20 to 30 years.
But so is there a reason you are not based in Hong Kong?
Well, I moved myself and my family sort of back to the U.S. I'm a U.S. lawyer. I'm a California lawyer. Came to law school in the U.S. More than 20 years ago. And before that, I also did most of my college in the U.S. We all had a great career back in Asia. I did 15 years of venture capital private equity deals as a lawyer, essentially porting international, but mostly U.S. capital technology and probably more importantly, human relations to the China tech industry. That kind of what I call the Gilded Age of China tech is clearly coming to an end now, if not already. At the same time, a lot of my clients need things to do overseas, in particular in the U.S. So for me, that's in terms of business, is a natural process of just following your clients.
Well, the economic landscape of China and Hong Kong has changed a lot in the past couple of years. I think we can talk about some of the anti-espionage laws that have come out. But the main thing I want to know is right now is how did the national security law in Hong Kong affect you and your business?
Are we talking about the National Security Law 1.0, which came out in middle of 2020, or the one that's just been announced under the 30-day consultation now?
Well, we are going to get to that. But so, run us through how the initial things change and how does it changing over time? Because there's also talk of Article 23 coming out, which we'll get to that.
That is what you're referring to, Article 23, the 30-day consultation, right? But let's start with the 2020 National Security Law.
Yeah, clearly a lot of things changed after the 2020 National Security Law came out, which probably targets more of the political activists, the pro-human rights, pro-democracy people. If you recall, first of all, that law came out from China. It was imposed by Beijing. It was, in terms of legal technicality, the law was created in the form of a amendment to the basic law, the mini constitution in Hong Kong. So the nature of that legislation is very different than the current one. After that, of course, that scared a lot of people, a lot of the business people. When I was in law school in California 20 years ago, out of the blue, many of the senior lawyer mentors would tell me that, hey, you are bilingual, bicultural, you're from China. If you go back to China now, we're talking about early 2000s, you have a great future. And just more specifically, if you go work at a large company or large law firm in Shanghai or Hong Kong, the training, the credentials will be no different than if you work at a similar type of company in New York or London. And of course, they were absolutely right. So pretty soon after I graduated and qualified as a lawyer in California, worked for 1 year in the US. Although initially I just wanted to be an intellectual property lawyer in California, but then pretty quickly I followed that kind of advice and went back to work in China. And then, of course, you start to do business in Beijing, Shanghai, and a lot of the mainland China background. Returnees like me at some point became Hong Kong citizens, and Hong Kong became our home. But that was the 20 years ago. I'm not sure. I'm really curious how many senior lawyers or business leaders are giving young people the same kind of advice these days, and in part because of the national security law.
Well, sort of what specific aspects of the national security law are making lawyers less interested in practicing law in Hong Kong?
Sure. Part of that shows the legislative process in Hong Kong, is no longer up to the normal standard of any mature Western democracy. It was not just national security law, but also what triggered it, which was the 2019 extradition bill. There are a lot of pretty dire implications, and we actually see so many people who are mainstream lawyers, mainstream business leaders, getting into trouble for colluding with alleged collusion with foreign powers, for somehow endangering national security, for somehow being suspicious of having seditious intent. And if you just look at the numbers, there are thousands and thousands of political prisoners in Hong Kong. Not all of them convicted. Many of them are still going through excruciating judicial process, and it doesn't look like they are able to find impartial judges, or they are free to retain their own lawyers of choice to defend them. So all this for a pretty long time. On the other hand, I guess it's fair to say that the many aspects of the business community didn't feel that threatened just yet, because that what I call national security law 1.0 generally targets local pro-democracy activists. But the writing is on the wall. Hong Kong is still a place where you can use Google products and look at international news. Well, there are some things that have become inconvenient. Some of the episodes of TV shows cannot be shown in Hong Kong on Amazon or Disney, and ChatGPT cannot be used in Hong Kong for some reasons. So all this together, it's just made the business environment pretty uncomfortable. But having said that, probably the larger reason for a lot of the expats or companies shrinking their presence in Hong Kong, that probably has more to do with the economic downturn in China, which started probably more than a year ago.
So the economic situation in mainland China is having a bigger impact than the national security law on foreign investors in Hong Kong.
I believe so. I believe it's fair to say. Having said that, if you look at what's happening in the draft National Security Law 2.0 based on Article 23 of the Hong Kong Basic Law, that probably more directly affects the foreign business people.
So tell us about that. Yeah.
Sure. Well, if you look at the 2020 law, it talks about collusion with the foreign powers or foreign forces. That's clearly is talking about the locals doing something that the government doesn't like. but the new one talks about foreign interference directly. So we will be looking at foreign investors, foreign analysts of international banks, for example. If they say something, for example, about Hong Kong dollar peg policy, that could be foreign interference that has some sort of a national security implications. And other than national security, the new law also very vaguely and broadly talks about, I'm looking at my notes here, there's a long list: treason, insurrection, sabotage, or foreign interference, we talk about that, state secret, espionage. And I'm not saying that other countries don't have these kind of laws. American and many other Western countries have laws about treason, insurrection, and so forth. But like I mentioned earlier, that kind of laws in a modern liberal democracy need to go through some pretty long legislative process and debates, and and that kind of scrutiny before the law come into effect. And Hong Kong clearly is not going to be the case. We'll see. It's going to happen in just about 4 weeks.
So what you're saying is, like, if a foreign, like a U.S. banker goes to Hong Kong and works in Hong Kong and publicly expresses a view that, for example, the Hong Kong dollar should be devalued compared to the U.S. dollar, that could be interpreted as illegal to say that?
That and many, many other things. What about short sellers? What about someone writing an article commenting about Chinese economy? What about someone writing an article about Hong Kongers relocating overseas or transferring their assets overseas?
Or even you saying that there's an economic downturn in mainland China. Chinese state-run media says there is no economic downturn.
Exactly. Especially you are saying things that's a message contradicting what the Hong Kong government or what the mainland China government is saying, then it could be a big problem under the new draft law.
Well, the strange thing about Article 23, I think, is that they tried to pass that back in 2003, and over 100,000 people protested that, if not more.
Of course, that was not ideal that you introduce a new law. I'm talking about 2003, where you introduce a new law under Article 23, and then the public were so unhappy that they were in the streets in large numbers. And then as a result, you pull it, you also see the chief executive, I think, finishing only one term rather than going for the second term, in part for this reason. That was not ideal, but that was a process which kind of worked. The people voiced their concerns, and the government refrained from doing something. The same thing kind of repeated in 2019 when the extradition law was passed. I'm not sure how many people, whether you guys or the listeners remember that the very first protest in 2019 was not a mass protest on the streets of normal people, regular Hong Kong citizens. It was on June 6, 2019. It was a lawyers' silent march of around 2,000 to 3,000 lawyers. It was a kind of hot and humid day. We are looking at it's early June already. We are looking at all these lawyers staging the largest lawyers' march in Hong Kong in history. And they were just walking slowly from the from the Court of a Final Appeal, the big classic building in Central, walked slowly towards the seaside and then towards the government building in Admiralty. And the request was very specific to delay, and very technical. The request was for the Hong Kong government to delay the second reading of the extradition bill, because once that reading is passed, the Hong Kong government was clearly going to push even faster for that law to become to be enacted. That march was a silent march. There was no slogan, no shouting, no words, and these people walked to the government center, submitted their petition, and went home, and that's it. If they listened, if they did something, a lot of things, disastrous things that we're talking about, the street violence and so forth, the big protests, the police violence and so forth, wouldn't happen.
Well, so since there was such a big protest against Article 23 back in 2003, why is it being pushed ahead now? Has it changed in any way, or is it still just as bad as it was back then?
We really don't know. People say it's probably a result of some sort of a culture of a performative politics, meaning rather than doing things to address the concerns of or desires of your constituents, the politicians need to do things for some people, maybe their bosses in Beijing or the liaison office to see. It's from the legal point of view, it's really hard to think, looking at this draft, there's anything punishable that's not already covered by the 2020 national security law. We don't know. But looking at the everyday politics and policy making and legislation in Hong Kong these days, it's also not a big surprise either.
Is it possible that they could, because Article 23 would be passed, what you call the Security Law 2.0, this would be passed by Hong Kong's own legislative body and technically be enforced by the Hong Kong government rather than being imposed by the Chinese government upon Hong Kong, that the Chinese government could then turn around and say, see, this is a legitimate, you can't criticize us. This is something Hong Kong's own government wanted.
Well, they already say you can't criticize.
Well, yes, but it could be a way of trying to legitimize the things that they're already doing. But instead of being okay, well, we're not doing this. This is Hong Kong doing it now.
Right, but I'm not sure that's we can say that the new law gives the Hong Kong government more power to enforce it. Well, I'm not a Hong Kong public law lawyer. I'm more of a international business lawyer. But just from some of the basic stuff that I know, I'm quite sure that over the past several years, since the National Security Law 2020 has been passed, there have been very well funded government enforcement in Hong Kong of that law, and there are people currently in court in Hong Kong being charged for that law. Some people have been convicted already. So the enforcement has been in full force for that one, and we have no reason to doubt that it won't be the same for the next one. And just looking at the draft, the next one, like I mentioned, has probably more to do with the business people, with the economic sector, with especially foreign companies and individuals doing business in Hong Kong. And looking at, regardless what the law says, because the law is so vague and the definitions are so broad, the way that they probably will interpret some of the provisions in the draft are also very concerning, because every day the government talks about seditious intent. Well, anything that you say that they don't like it could be interpreted as something done by you with seditious intent, or soft resistance. The government talk about how some people, even though they're not on the street, even though they're not doing anything violent, they are not cooperating, they're not patriotic, they are using soft resistance against the government. What is soft resistance? We really don't know. And what's national security? What's national security or national secret? Well, arguably anything that the government touches is national security or national secret. And the past several years, especially in mainland China, bigger part of the economy has been taken over by state-owned companies. And all those companies, their information, their conducts, their data have something to do with the state.
Yeah, I wonder, you mentioned these broad, vague definitions. That's kind of what we see happening with the law in mainland China, right? When people are arrested under these like vague definitions.
Like the joke goes, right? What is a national secret? Well, it's a national secret.
Do you think that this is going to this is the beginning of this infecting Hong Kong's judicial system and court system as well? And are we going to continue seeing that?
Well, I really, I wouldn't say I'm an expert because I'm not really a barrister or litigator in Hong Kong, but just from the things we see, right? A few days ago, a Hong Kong court ordered Evergrande, the large mainland China real estate company, to dissolve because of bankruptcy. The process has been dragging long enough that the court said, quote unquote, enough is enough, and the company needs to go into dissolution. And that's probably not something the mainland China government wants to see right now, given how they're dealing with economic nosedive led by real estate sector. So, one way to look at it is, hey, maybe Hong Kong, judges still have retained some level of independence if they are doing certain things that mainland China probably doesn't want to see. But then again, that's about that's a company that's been in trouble for a while.
Well, I'm also curious about that because I know most of Evergrande's assets are actually in mainland China. So
right.
The Hong Kong court ordering it to dissolve, does that really affect those mainland Chinese assets?
Well, in theory, possible. Since 2021, if not earlier, there has been some agreement between mainland China and Hong Kong to recognize or enforce each other's judicial decisions. And a few days ago, it was announced and quickly came into effect on January 29th, the mutual recognition of court decisions, whether civil or criminal cases, between Hong Kong and China, where if the decision has something to do with monetary value or financial damages or a fine, then the courts on the other side will be able to enforce that. Having said that, well, historically, if you have a court decision in Hong Kong, you want to enforce that through the assistance of some court in mainland China, the chances for the mainland court to help you are very small. And under the new regime coming out a few days ago, that becomes easier, and the reversed could be more true, meaning someone lost a case in mainland China or someone got fined by a government in mainland China. And you as a founder, entrepreneur, or your company do not have enough funds in China to cover that. And you have something in Hong Kong, they can go to Hong Kong to directly enforce that and maybe do so very quickly. And that's a huge problem for anyone from mainland China having assets in Hong Kong. People are talking about Hong Kong's wealth management industry being a large part of it being wiped out overnight. Maybe it's put yourself in the shoes of someone doing business in China or a foreign company. Doesn't have to be a Chinese individual or company. Could be a Western company doing business in China. A lot of them have assets in Hong Kong.
So when you and your law firm advise companies that are doing business there, and you tell them about these changes that are happening, what is their reaction to this?
Well, a lot of business people are very smart, and I generally don't even need to tell them much. I'll give you an example. Just recently, a few weeks ago, I was advising a client from China, a pretty sizable private company, about setting up overseas funds, investment funds, private funds.
This is a financial services company?
No, it's a larger manufacturing company, and they have a lot of technology. They have a pretty substantial footprint outside of China already. And then, we're in a meeting. I was, as a lawyer, giving them just a high-level introduction about all these offshore jurisdictions where you can consider setting up the fund because, as you know, a lot of these offshore tax havens have zero tax, pretty much everything zero tax. So after talking about Cayman and BVI, As a lawyer, and I know the stuff, and I also have some sort of obligation to give the client the full picture. So of course, I would mention that since a few years ago, Hong Kong introduced a limited partnership fund, or LPF scheme, to essentially take over some of the fund information business from Cayman Islands. And a lot of those policies are pretty attractive. Hong Kong is, in many ways, pretty desperate, as we all know, about foreign investments or talent. After I mentioned that on the phone with a client, we were talking about people from mainland China. It was a silence for dead silence for maybe 5 to 10 seconds. Pretty uncomfortable. I was wondering what's going on, and then they just said, "Well, Mr. Qiu, can you talk to us more about Luxembourg or Switzerland or Ireland?" As if I didn't say anything about Hong Kong. So I guess part of the point, or the picture here is the most important factor, I would argue, about Hong Kong's decline is not necessarily about expats leaving Hong Kong or foreign companies being nervous about being entangled with national security law and so forth. Of course, those are meaningful. Those are important. Those create a lot of headlines. But a bigger factor is the most of the top business people in China, from what I observe, have been pretty disillusioned about what's going on in Hong Kong since a while ago, probably even
So
2019.
So it sounds to me like a lot of the major businesses in China are trying to get their assets out of China. Have you seen that?
Well, if they do so, then they will face a lot of difficulties. I guess that's tells you why China, in the foreseeable future, will never going to really make RMB a fully convertible, a truly international currency. If they do that, how many business people or wealthy people or asset managers in China will try to move their assets overseas? I don't think a Chinese government is ready to see that kind of thing happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like the Chinese economy would be bigger and better if there weren't so much control by the CCP, but the CCP doesn't want to give up that control, and it just becomes this self-fulfilling cycle that limits China.
Yeah, as they say, character is destiny. It's very much true here.
I do think it's interesting to go back to your anecdote about the company who didn't appear to want to put that money in Hong Kong versus actually overseas. Is this why you think that Hong Kong's wealth management fund, like that industry, would collapse because people in mainland China would not be willing to put their money in Hong Kong if they could, if Hong Kong essentially the same laws would apply in mainland China as Hong Kong?
Right. Well, if people say that the Hong Kong wealth management industry will collapse overnight, I probably would disagree. Hong Kong is still, the international financial center for China, with all the things that have happened in 4 weeks. When National Security Law 2.0 happens, what's gonna be triggered by that, we don't really know. But it's close to China. It's Hong Kong still has a lot of institutions. Many of them, such as a court, at least nominally on paper, are independent. And if you are someone doing business in China, you have very few ways to convert your assets to, non-RMB denominated assets, and you don't have many places to go. Of course, a lot of people have moved to, overseas, and painstakingly converted their currency to foreign currencies. That will not happen overnight. But we probably will see more of a slow, could be fast, deflating of that kind of industry in Hong Kong.
Do you think the Chinese government is going to try to take steps to slow that deflation, or are they pretty much willing to let this happen?
Well, I'm not sure they have the will to do that, given what's going on here? One thing that really baffles me is that the past 2 weeks, as we all know, because the market is nosediving in both mainland China and Hong Kong, the government in China have issued probably more than a dozen policies to prop up the market. And at the same time, Hong Kong government keep introducing these new laws that's scary to the market. Well, I really don't know what's going on here.
So this Article 23 that they're looking to pass in Hong Kong, or you call it National Security 2.0. I want to compare that to what happened in Macau 15 years ago, and Macau being sort of the redheaded stepchild of the conversation, but that's also under one country, two systems.
Mm-hmm.
Macau passed Article 23, I believe, in 2009, and how's that been going for them?
I'm not an expert about Macau. I know very little. Maybe what happened in Hong Kong was some sort of inspiration. So what happened in Macau was some sort of inspiration or clue for Beijing and Hong Kong government to create the National Security Law 1.0 and now 2.0. Maybe in some ways they saw Macau as a success case, as a model of what Hong Kong could be doing. If that's the case, then they really ignored some very important fact that Hong Kong had been a much bigger economy, much more diverse economy, much more impact on China. Hong Kong has a lot of the governance and judicial roots in the British common law, which Macau doesn't have. And every year, around 60 to 70% of the foreign investments into China, of all the foreign investments going into China, go through Hong Kong. Of course, a lot of that are investments by the overseas affiliates of mainland China companies. But still, it shows you how Hong Kong is fundamentally different than Macau.
So I have a question about the Hong Kong court system and how that's changing. So Hong Kong for a long time under British law, and then also for the first part of one country, two systems, was seen as having an independent judiciary, right? And there's probably over 100 judges of different types in Hong Kong. If just 4 or 5 years ago they were seen as being independent, and now very quickly after the national security law, we started seeing judges making more political decisions. That is, the politically correct decisions according to what Beijing wants. How does that happen? Because judges are human beings, and they don't just suddenly decide to go from being independent, upholding the rule of law, to suddenly be like, yeah, you know what, I should do what the Communist Party wants.
Sure. Well, I'm not an expert, but I'm quite sure Hong Kong judges are nominated by the government and then approved or appointed by the court. So you can see that the government itself has a major role to play in that process. I'm not saying that many Western countries, including the U.S., are that different in that regard, because federal judges are nominated by the executive branch and then approved by Congress. But Hong Kong is a smaller place, and a lot of these judges, maybe they have a personal, dealings, or I'm not saying that a lot of judges are, intentionally creating conflict interest, but they have family, they have kids. Many of the people in their immediate circle, do business in China. They have the influence from China, and through the process of judges being appointed, maybe it's has been for years that judges typically they have this kind of ideology that conforms with what the Hong Kong government wants gets appointed. That could be the case. Well, having said that, at least from the surface, they still have a facade of judicial independence. And, we're watching how things will be moving. Over the past few years, a lot of the foreign judges have resigned from the court.
When it comes to the national security law, I understand that there's a 100% conviction rate for people charged under that law.
Mm-hmm. If I don't have the numbers, but if that's the case, that probably shows how at least that part of the criminal process in Hong Kong echoes what happens in China, where there's also more than 99% of conviction rate.
Isn't there a special court that tries national security law cases? That's tried in a different way than.
So you'd really only need to corrupt a few judges, right, to make that work.
That could be the case. I didn't look at the numbers, but it does look like there are several judges who tend to make decisions about national security law charges, and they generally make decisions that conforms with what the government wants.
And I understand that those cases are not trial by jury. The judge will make the decision after the testimony.
Right. Right. Again, I'm an international, corporate lawyer, but from what I know, it's compared to the U.S., it's not so much a rights or default that certain cases must be tried by jury. So Hong Kong does have common law roots, and many cases are tried by jury, but to my knowledge, not for the national security law cases.
So big picture, how would you be advising foreign businesses interested in the China market? Because, as you mentioned, the Chinese economy is doing poorly. There's the anti-espionage law that has gotten a lot of foreign companies spooked, the arrest of foreign employees. Then there's the whole, tensions between the U.S. and China and different kinds of sanctions going on. How do you navigate this? Is the China market even viable anymore?
Well, as a lawyer, our job is to look for solutions. So I wouldn't tell the clients that China is uninvestable, but I would, point out how several aspects of doing business in China have become a lot more difficult. That relates to what happens in Hong Kong, but then again, so this topic right now is more about China. The specific aspects are mainly four. One is that doing due diligence in China has become very hard. Since about a year ago, we all know that a bunch of due diligence or market research or investigation consultants have been in trouble. Not just local companies, but also multinational companies, the larger ones, based in New York, like a Mint School. That really sends a bad message to international investors and large companies alike. And the legislative process in China has been highly disruptive and unpredictable. 20 years ago, at that time, I'm not saying that the government in China at that time were not fundamentally Soviet, but it was much more feasible for the business community, for the Chamber of Commerces, for the bar associations to at least talk to government officials about this and that. And sometimes things can change, or some legislation, some new rules could be delayed. That's not the case anymore. And day in, day out, business operations in China are getting harder. It could be difficult to get, if you're in the content business, foreign journalists, for example, hard to get people issued a visa by the government. And if you get into some trouble on the ground in China, your staffers could be subject to exit ban, deny of departure, and get trapped in China. If you have, if you handle any data, there's are a lot of new data security laws which prevent you from transferring data from China to your headquarters overseas. And if you do have executives traveling to China, they are probably, rightfully concerned about data privacy, that they don't want to bring their own mobile phones or laptops. If they do bring something like that, they bring burner phones or burner laptops. And finally, the exits from the market, meaning ways to cash out from your assets or equity in China have become more difficult. IPO process uh, is more unpredictable now. DD, for example, 2 years ago went public in the US without the blessing of one or several regulators in Beijing. And a few months later, they got ordered to delist from the New York stock market, and then they got fined a record amount of I think 80 billion RMB for alleged leak of user information to foreign regulators. So all these due diligence operations, investor exits, and the lack of influence on the rulemaking process became a huge headache for overseas investors. Those are just very practical stuff. It's not just about human rights or or political activism.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine like with business, it like requires at least some level of trust. And if you feel like you have to bring a burner phone with you, like that just seems so challenging to any kind of meaningful business interaction.
Right. Or if you are a senior foreign executive, you probably to be based in China, you want to bring your family and your teenage kids all of a sudden realize that they cannot access YouTube, anything. Well, they can use VPNs, but strictly speaking, using VPNs is illegal in China.
So, okay, let's say you're a Wall Street, hedge fund or something, or wealth management company, and you want to put, say, $1 million of client money into like a Shanghai stock, right? And then you decide to sell that stock later. Can you? And let's say the stock didn't go up or down, so you still got $1 million worth of stock. You sell it. Can you now get that $1 million back?
Well, to my knowledge, there's not much difficulty doing that.
Because there are capital controls, right? Equivalent to about 50,000 a year that people can only move that much money out of China at a time.
Right, but the capital control mostly target locals and local companies, not so much international investors. China, with all the things that happened in China, Hong Kong, that's not great. Well, the past few years, China did open up the market quite a bit more to welcome the Wall Street type of investors to participate in the market. For example, for decades, China didn't allow foreign banks to own more than 25%, let alone majority of the joint venture security houses in China. Now they can wholly own those entities in China. Of course, unfortunately, their participation in the market has been small, in part because the economy has not been good. But in theory, there's a lot more easy access to the capital market in China.
Do you have any insight to why the Chinese Communist Party made that change?
I guess there's a desire to upgrade the level of services in the financial sector in China, because most of the players in China even today are state-owned banks, and they are really incompetent, doing all sort of small things. They have a lot of branches, they hire a lot of people, but to give you an example, after I was already working in China for almost 10 years, after I moved from Shanghai back to Beijing, this was around 10 years ago, they still refused to issue me a credit card because somehow, the fact that you work at an international company, you had you're a U.S. lawyer, you already paid a lot of tax in China, doesn't count towards their risk calculation, or maybe they don't know how to do the math on the risks.
Well, I'd imagine one of the big challenges any kind of business in China would face is, so you have something like the Uyghur forced labor bill, where like Nike, they can't have Uyghur slave labor in their supply chain. But China specifically, like the supply chains are very murky, things overlap. And now with like this anti-espionage law, you can't even really do the kind of due diligence you need to find these things out. And so then you can run afoul of both China and U.S. sanctions. How do you advise businesses to navigate that?
That goes back to your earlier point that this kind of desire to have maximum control really sabotages your other desire to attract a foreign business or grow the economy. Right, the past few years, there's an acceleration in creating what I call a culture of secrecy. So much so that China has become sort of a information black hole. I used to be on the board of the Shanghai Foreign Correspondence Club. Now we used to have around 200 members who hold the J visa, the Chinese visa issued to foreign journalists. Now that number has really dwindled to probably a double digit and several dozen journalists now. But today there are no foreign journalists in China from Canada or India at all. Period. That's a big difference. Yeah, sorry, maybe that's mistaken. Maybe it should be Australia and India. But both are pretty large economies close to China, have a lot of interest in China. So another example, since about a year ago, they started to take down the published court decisions from the court website. There's been a major website, I think, created in conjunction with Chinese court since around 15 years ago. That was a major positive news for both local and international lawyers doing business in China. Where we're looking at each other and say, hey, even though we don't have judicial independence in China, at least a lot of the decisions are public now, easy to search, and we can see, how the cases were decided. We can show them to courts, and even though prior cases or precedents are not binding when it comes to decision making at courts in China, we at least have something to look at, some references to point to. That's no longer the case. They took down, they shut down the database, took out all the decisions. They announced a new database, but only select few cases approved by the government will be published. That's just part of many of the things that creates this a culture of secrecy.
Now, China also has a policy of, they call it military civil fusion, where essentially any IP a so-called private Chinese company has, if the Chinese Communist Party demands it, they have to give it to the military. How do you advise businesses who, they're doing business with a so-called private Chinese company, and then suddenly, like, it turns out, oh, this is being used for the Chinese military, and now they are in bigger trouble than they thought it was a private business, but then nothing really is private in China.
Right. Well, part of that is also not that unusual, because many countries have policies, or America has defense laws to say that in some sort of emergency, the government can commandeer some of the production capabilities of private companies to contribute to national defense. I think part of that was triggered during COVID. And China's military civil fusion specifically means that when the need arises, then civil capabilities, let's say shipbuilding, will be quickly converted to military use. That does create problems in part because of the international geopolitics. U.S. and China are mutually suspicious, and there are executive orders coming out from the U.S. Congress, pointing fingers to companies. And just 2 days ago, on January 31st, there was another list published by the Defense Department, naming a few dozens of Chinese companies who have presence in the U.S. That these companies have been part of the civil military fusion efforts in China, and many of those are pretty large companies. and at least one of them is one of the top tier venture capital funds. So, if you are a investor who invested in those companies, had a joint venture in those companies, um, have been part of the investment portfolio of any of those companies, you probably should be concerned, because the big difference in the U.S. Between the executive branch something putting together that kind of list and the Congress complaining about you is that the executive branch can immediately issue policies and rules and executive orders and do something about you. Congress on their hand, when it comes to creating laws, that could be a long process. Look at how much they criticize TikTok, but not much has really been done about TikTok, especially not so much from the legislative side in the U.S. So these days I'm happy to talk to any companies if they get into trouble through that kind of geopolitical tensions that increasingly becomes work for a lawyer like me day in day out.
Have you talked to any companies who are trying to pull out of China? Like we talked about a lot of investing in, but now we hear talk about more companies leaving.
Sure, of course, many, but there are all kinds of companies have been doing some sort of business in China. Well, China even today it's a second largest economy in the world. Foreign investors, many of them have downsized or liquidated their portfolios in China, and what we call the hot money, which goes back to the point that Matt was mentioning about. If you have a portfolio of assets, equity on the public market, then you generally can pretty quickly pull out and get your money out and convert it to the currency that you desire. For manufacturers, that's much harder because China does have the top expertise, sometimes exclusive expertise, in many areas of high-end manufacturing. That's not something easy to do away with. I recently talked to a U.S. company that has something to do with the electric car industry, based in the U.S. on the East Coast. The founder has it's a American, had decades of doing business in China. So all the senior people keenly understand how China is a lower cost, higher quality. If they try to pull out, the company's competitive advantage is gone overnight. So what do you do? Most companies have to just watch what's going on in China. At the same time, feeling scared about what happened to many Western companies' interest in Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. Many of those foreign stakeholders need to write off their assets in millions of or maybe billions of dollars. That really scares people.
So I know it's always hard to predict the market, but where do you see things going? I mean, there's all these challenges with investing in China, both from the Chinese Communist Party having a more authoritarian control over business. There's the sanctions that the U.S. is doing. Is this only going to get worse? Is China becoming just an untenable investment opportunity, or is this a case where it's like, hey, now's the time, triple your investment in China, it's on the downswing, and then it's going to go back up?
Right. In the short term, what I see is that people try to diversify. A lot of foreign companies that have big stakes in China try to create some sort of China plus one, maybe China's plus 2 or 3 strategy, and it goes both ways. A lot of Chinese companies are trying to diversify away from China. Many of the successful companies, TikTok, Temu, Shein. Legally speaking, they're not Chinese companies. They're from China. The founders are from China. I'm not sure what kind of passport they would hold, but they all are headquartered in the Western countries,
or like Singapore,
US, Singapore, Ireland. There are many choices. They work with a lot of lawyers and consultants and tax consultants. And a lot of Chinese companies, like I said, developed a strong edge in manufacturing. They have technology and they have capital. And part of that is not necessarily a political crackdown in China, but just the fact that the economy is not doing very well. There's a lot of competition in China, so the world is their oyster. Especially if you're looking at electric vehicle companies and battery companies. They have a lot of opportunities to invest, to build joint ventures in Western countries. They've been doing so.
Do you see the Chinese government restricting any of that kind of activity in the future?
Uh, Very good question. I do see it coming. I actually do, warn people about that. Recently, a couple of months ago, we saw how China somewhat cracked down on Foxconn. When the news first came out, it surprised a lot of people. Foxconn, they're one of the few companies that, have a still been doing well. Why do you do that? But that probably has something to do with the fact that Foxconn has been moving some of the manufacturing business, including uh, the orders they fill for Apple to India and some other countries. But uh, but it doesn't seem like that kind of thing really would slow down um, the exodus or diversification away from China.
If anything, you might want to get out now before they start a wider crackdown, I guess. Yeah.
Right. A lot of companies have created pretty creative ways to hedge their bets in China, and we talk to our clients about what they can do day in day out.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. This was very, very interesting. I mean, perhaps for some of our audience that are multi-billionaire hedge funds, if they tell us where they can go to learn about your company, where they can get your advice.
Oh, sure. We are a boutique firm in New York. A lot of us are, just senior lawyers who had decades of doing litigation in the U.S. relating to financial markets, or like me, the past 15 years, I was mostly handling uh, tech industry related due diligence, transactions, fund formation. One of my colleagues, Dennis Kwok, was a legislator in Hong Kong representing the legal industry for almost 10 years before he also moved to the US a couple of years ago, did a fellowship at Harvard, and co-founded this firm. So we are here to work with all sorts of market participants that have something to do, well, especially with the Asia market, but also a lot of the things relating to Asia, but in the US.
Yeah, I wish we had time to have talk more about the impact of the tech crackdown a few years ago, since that was kind of your specialty. So I guess we'll have you back on another time. But thank you very much for joining us. This was very informative.
Yeah, that could be another interesting topic.
Yeah, definitely. After listening to Benjamin for a while, I got an idea of how the U.S. could actually tackle TikTok and things like that, TikTok and Temu.
Go on.
So, well, I mean, as he mentioned, Congress has talked a lot about TikTok and nothing's happened, really. What if instead of approaching it like, okay, we need to use U.S. legislation to stop these companies? What if, since these are businesses that, want to make money, since, the whole China economy kind of sucks and they're trying to get out now, what if we try to incentivize these companies to grow in China, but require them to do things that will get the Chinese Communist Party to crack down on them, like make them, be transparent or such and such, like offer them the golden goose of the U.S. economy, and then like they get strangled by the CCP. Get what I'm saying?
I do.
I don't know specifically what those things need to do. Maybe like some kind of data transparency, some kind of openness thing that the Communist Party will be like, no, you're actually Chinese-controlled companies. You don't get to do that.
I think TikTok has actually already been running into this because
it has.
Like the parent company, right? Oh, TikTok is if you hear the TikTok CEO, he will always say about TikTok is an American company or whatever, blah blah blah. It is not headquartered in China, but the parent company is. So
that was a big mistake. Senator Cotton made it like a recent congressional thing about TikTok. He's talking to the guy, and he's like, "Are you or have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?" And he's like, "I'm Singaporean."
Yeah.
It's like that was the wrong question.
Yeah. I mean, those questions that senators ask, they're mostly like grandstanding and not like, you know what I mean?
There was another one. It was Lindsey Graham talking to Mark Zuckerberg. I'm pretty sure it was Zuckerberg. I was like at one of these social media things, and he was like, I appreciate what you're trying to do, Mr. Zuckerberg, and anything, but you have blood on your hands. And I'm like, Mr. Military Industrial Complex, Lindsey Graham talking about having blood on your hands. Come on.
Well, I mean, it's...
Anyways, my brilliant idea to use the U.S. economy. So instead of like trying to use it like a hammer to smash these companies, you lure them in and then get the pressure to be put by the Chinese Communist Party.
Interesting. I think that would be very interesting. I think the only problem with this idea is expecting Congress to be able to pass laws in a timely manner that would actually have the effect you're looking for before TikTok and Temu already have reaped the fruit of the American economy.
Yeah, well, why wait for Congress to make laws when the president can just issue executive orders, which have a similar impact?
Powerful central leader who can...
I believe the Trump administration tried to with TikTok. Do something, and that didn't fly, did it?
And then, I think it didn't go, and then Biden reversed it as soon as he came into office.
Yeah. So I don't know that the executive orders are a way to go here.
We just need the right executive, somebody with the clear vision and the radical nature to implement any crazy idea he has.
A sort of supreme leader for life.
Supreme. Let's go to Taco Bell. I want a Crunchwrap Supreme.
All right, and we begin to go off the rails.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually, in the beginning, when you started talking about this brilliant idea you had, I thought it was going to be a joke setup. So I was a little unprepared when you actually had an idea that was like serious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one. People, Congress, I know you're watching. Lindsey Graham, I'm sorry about that swipe. You're a great guy. Can I get some of that military industrial complex money? But yeah, implement this plan. It's great. I'll save America.
We do, wage information warfare.
That's
according to the Chinese Communist Party, right?
We need some of that Raytheon money.
Oh my gosh.
I want a desk that can launch a missile. That would only blow up our own studio. Wait, unless we can get it with rockets on it so we can fly the desk.
A missile of truth.
That's right. Wow. My good idea. I derailed it.
Wow. Yeah. I think you were making a cogent point. Like, it was almost there.
It was almost, I mean, it was there.
I'm just thinking about Taco Bell now.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I thought it was interesting, the whole thing about how these Chinese companies are trying to
yeah. Well, that's what made me think of it. Like they don't want a part of this any more than anybody else does. So why not just incentivize them? Use the carrot instead of the stick. It's kind of, the Taoists' path of least resistance. Rather than trying to smash TikTok, let the Communist Party do the smashing. They're good at that. Whole history of that.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you for watching China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell, the Ideas Man.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda, the Mustache Man.
And we'll see you at Taco Bell. This episode not sponsored by Taco Bell.